Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's been a great week so far, and we're looking forward to continuing it on here. And as we said, we're going to be taking everybody on a little bit of a journey today. We're going to talk about the cloud. We're going to talk about a lot of different aspects of it, but in particular, we wanted to leave everybody here with some tools, some best practices, some techniques that you can take back to your own organizations as you consider something that, like it or not, impacts everybody in the overall payment ecosystem. And so today we're going to be talking about global payments and their move to the cloud. And Steve here is going to be sharing some details from his perspective. I'm going to be giving a little bit of overall industry perspective as well. And we're happy to be here. Again, my name is Adam Cason. And
I'm Steve Wilson from Global Payments.
Wonderful. And so with that, let's go ahead and kick things off here. So starting out from a broad standpoint, looking at the cloud. I don't need to go through stats. I don't need to do anything like that. Everybody's already seen all the cloud stats that they could possibly digest in a lifetime. But at this point, from what we've seen and from what I know in talking to a lot of people out here throughout the week, a lot of people have seen is that the cloud for payments is here to stay. And there are a lot of considerations to keep in mind for it, both from a business standpoint, talking about how cloud technology, both for payment application hosting and for aspects related to cryptography and key management, are enabling new business agility. They're allowing organizations to focus on their core competency, all the typical things that you see for any type of enterprise workloads. Now, with some of the work that PCI has been doing over the last few years with cloud HSM special interest groups, with evolutions in standards like PCI HSM v4 that take cloud HSM into consideration, we're seeing really an emergence of the cloud moving from just pure enterprise workload use cases out into payments as well. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and we're very excited for that. Now, to begin with, I think, Steve, do you want to give maybe some context around global payments?
Yeah, so TSYS started its cloud journey around about 2017, but it didn't go mainstream until 2021 when TSYS and Global Payments merged. Our strategy originally was to explore the art of the possible and to get our dev and test systems into the cloud and take advantage of flexibility and agility from that. That quickly changed into the need to provide live service. And our motivations for our cloud journey were flexibility, agility, geographic reach, control over data residency, and the opportunity to modernize product offerings and realign with our client requirements.
You know, and that's an interesting one, and we'll talk about this more later, but you mentioned data residency and geographic reach.
Yep.
That's a very interesting one. Yeah. Well, and that's something that I guess just to lead off with one thing for everybody here to take and think about their own organization and the considerations they're making. Data residency and latency are two of the most common questions that we see when people talk about the cloud. They're the first things in people's mind is, are we even allowed to do this in the first place? Or if we are, how can it be done? Well, data residency, one of the biggest recommendations I would have, and one of the things we've seen in this area time and time again, is for organizations to take a very, very close look at what the actual literal legislative requirements around data residency are. Because quite often I've actually seen that there's almost an assumption that, well, of course we do things a certain way here and we're not allowed to do this and that. It's data residency. But when people start actually digging into the pure legislative requirements in their respective country or region, all of a sudden they might find that, well, maybe it's a little more possible than we originally thought. So,
or not. Sometimes.
This is true. There are certain regions where it is mandatory to run payment workloads inside the country, and that's very, very valid.
Yeah. So compute and storage resources are readily available to host our modernized applications, but payment class HSMs, scheme connectivity, and endpoints are the two kind of biggest technical challenges to cloud deployment. Originally, we were considering deploying our own HSMs in colo facilities. But then with the advent of cloud HSMs and HSMs as a service, that opened up other possibilities. But teams should understand that there are side effects from using cloud HSMs, particularly around latency applications are no longer next to the HSMs, which is what we're normally used to in on-premise deployments. And that adds additional time that gets chewed up in the authorization response time. There's additional network complexity. So between, again, the application, the workload, and the HSM, there's now a lot of different network infrastructure that we're not used to being there, and that adds complexity, adds complications for diagnosis and troubleshooting of network-related issues. It's not as easy to TCP dump in the cloud as well. It's always interesting. And then again, data residency. You know, it's definitely a hot topic. It's something that needs to be considered, particularly if the HSMs are going to be in different locations for your application workload. Well, PCI SSC and the Cloud SIG are doing a good job in providing good guidance on cloud deployment models. And it's clearly been an accelerator, and the industry direction in terms of cloud deployment is clear. Just like to make one point, when we're talking about cloud HSMs, we're not talking about software-based encryption. We are talking about physical hardware security modules just in somebody else's data center.
Yeah, exactly. That is really key, is back to that hardware component, the hardware in
Absolutely.
hardware security modules. So just real briefly, for those of you who need a little bit of a refresher on this area, hardware security modules are hardware-based devices, cryptographic modules that are used to protect sensitive data. Physical and logical security measures that enable them to be tamper-evident and tamper-responsive. Within the PCI world, there's the PCI HSM certification specifically for those. There's also FIPS 140-2 Level 3, which is now moving to FIPS 140-3 Level 3. But essentially, these devices are required for card issuance, for payment acquiring, for everything in the mobile world related to payments. And how they're deployed, though, is one of the interesting trends we're seeing, where historically, go back decades, it was all on premises. But now we're seeing with the cloud different service models emerging. You have HSM as a service, you've got multi-tenant HSM environments, which are more on the managed services side. You've got hybrid environments where organizations want to have a little bit of a stair-step approach into the cloud, and they want the ability to still run in their existing on-premises ecosystem and use something in the cloud. A lot of different considerations there that I wish we had a couple of hours of time here to talk about those, because there are a lot of considerations that go into picking which one is right for you, but that's something to think about.
So our systems, we've got our dev environment, QA, UAT, and production environments now in the cloud, using the VirtueCrypt HSM as a service that Adam's been explaining. This allows on-demand provisioning and scaling of HSM resources, including the ability to deploy in specific regions. Again, we talked about data residency, and control the latency. HSM master keys, the management of HSM master keys is important, particularly to a company like Global Payments. And Futurex offer a couple of different models for this. One is the management of all the key material by Futurex. They've got custodians to do all that work. But for Global Payments, it was important that we're in control of our own keys. So we've got an experienced key management team, and they are responsible for managing the keys on the remote HSMs. We have a VPN between our key management facility and each of the HSMs, and with the help of an Encryption touch device from these guys, we have the ability to load the key material. And so what we've got here is a brief overview of our deployment. On the left, we've got our production UAT applications. We've got our egress VPC, which is our inspection point for traffic leaving our AWS environment on its way to wherever, in this case to Futurex. We've got the encryption services workspaces, which is what we use to manage our working key material, which sits in our environment. And then you can see the private link endpoints, and going over to the right, going over to the HSMs through the VirtueCrypt access points and the Futurex VPC.
So, something interesting, maybe a question to help add some color to the environment here. So all of this is all inside cloud, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me, all of our application is inside the cloud. All of our key management functions, the actual application, databases, everything, yes.
Okay, and that's a really interesting one. I think when organizations look to develop their cloud strategy and how they're going to take next steps forward, looking at it and saying, all right, do we want to follow a model like this where it's, hey, let's get everything in there? There are other ways, whether it's multi-cloud approaches or whether it's transitioning over time, different applications, things like that. But there really is a huge diversity of different ways to do it. And similarly, once you get onto the actual cryptography side, the cloud HSM side, looking at it and identifying what points are important to you as an organization. Is it important to have elastic scalability, or do you have relatively consistent workloads? For example, in a card issuance environment, you might be able to predict with a fair amount of accuracy what your workloads are going to be. You may be able to kind of handle that in a way where you don't need that scalability. There may be others, merchant acquirers, for example, when you're getting ready to go into the holiday season, and you are going to have times where maybe 1 or 2 days of the year are substantially higher volume than any other day of the year. Taking that into consideration is important. Similarly, as far as the connectivity between your application and the cloud, from a security standpoint, from a TLS connectivity standpoint, is there anything you want to talk about for that, or?
I mean, because these HSMs are remote, again, we have to rely on TLS for the connections to the HSMs. Cert management is a challenge in any environment. Obviously, the lifetime of certificates is going one way, so automation is a big thing. It's definitely something that we need, that needs to be addressed and thought about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so looking at how this overall ecosystem might need to coexist alongside existing certificate management solutions, or how the processes, policies, and really all of that work together, it's pretty important there.
Yep.
One other area that you mentioned earlier that I think would be worth digging into a little bit would be key management. And in the payments world, key management is a little bit unique. For those of you who've used general purpose HSMs for general cryptographic use cases or key management, you know that typically the major keys never leave the HSM. You randomly generate them inside the HSM, and you don't really have any need to exchange those in typical scenarios. Payments are different, though. We all live in a shared world here, and there's a lot of interoperability, a lot of key exchange between different organizations in the overall ecosystem. And so one of the challenges I think that organizations need to think about in deploying HSMs in the cloud, payment applications in the cloud, is how that's going to impact their relationships with processors, with key providers, with anything else like that. Now, you guys have opted to really have a lot of procedural and operational control over key management.
Yeah, and as I said before, we've got a mature key management team within encryption services, and it's important to us to be in control of our key material, particularly the master keys, the working keys, goes without saying. So yeah, the bring your own key was very important to us. It's been quite a decisive factor in the choice of Futurex as a partner.
Yeah, and when you look at typical ways that payment keys are managed and some of the emerging trends we're seeing, especially in the cloud ecosystem, really it's coming down to two major areas of focus. One, as Steve said, is more of a BYOK, or bring your own key approach, where end users, organizations dealing with this, retain control over the processes of loading keys into their HSM ecosystem, in managing them. As you said, Steve, that provides a greater level of control. From a process standpoint, maybe can you speak about some of that too?
Yeah. So again, our processes are well honed. They've been in place for a lot of time. We've got a team that is regularly used to doing that. So it just made sense for us to do that. The other keys, the working keys, we manage those within our own key management system within our application. As I mentioned before, that is in the cloud as well. And all the keys, the working keys, are stored in there under the master key as is normal. And we use exactly the same processes we would on premise for Prime in the cloud to manage our working keys.
So I think that's a really good point. And something that's worth taking into consideration is that your processes around compliance, around key management, those don't necessarily have to change. And in many cases, they should remain exactly the same.
Agreed.
In other cases, one of the main drivers of organizations moving workloads out to the cloud is offloading effort. I don't want to say responsibility, it's the wrong word to use for this, but offloading effort and increasing efficiency there. And so one of the other models that we've seen take hold within the industry is key management as a service, or on-behalf key management, where organizations can delegate key agency to service providers who then, on their behalf, will take those, manage the key lifecycle, load those into HSMs, and then provide reporting as needed.
And I was just going to mention the attestation of compliance. So with the HSM as a service offering, the attestation of compliance, the responsibility matrix, it is key to get from your vendor to help with your PCI assessments.
I think that level of communication, that level of work is something that we've seen in the industry emerge as it relates to the cloud, where it's now no longer just a sole relationship between an end user and their QSA firm.
Yep.
There are a lot of other people involved, other entities involved, the cloud service provider, the HSM as a service provider. And I think, at least from my perspective, it seems pretty important from the start to engage all the different people in there. And that's maybe an important takeaway to start with is don't try to go at anything like this alone. Find out who inside your organization the stakeholders are and involve them, but also externally. Look at all the people who need to be in the same room there and say, here, this is our plan, this is what we're doing, what would you advise? As far as the right people to get in the room.
Yeah, I think communication is key, and understanding the responsibility matrix. It's a big part. And it helps everybody to understand what their roles are, what they need to do. It definitely helps.
Yeah, one of the most important drivers that I've seen for organizations who are looking at this move to the cloud is really around the HSM piece, because historically, like I said earlier, these have been on premises, and so using these types of tools as a kind of a workload unblocker for the cloud has really been important, where for a while now, organizations have been able to say, all right, we can put our payment application inside AWS or Azure or Google or wherever else, right? But how do you handle some of the cryptography? And it's one of the things that I found interesting about how some of the PCI standards evolving over the last few years have really taken that into consideration and said, all right, we know this is the direction the industry is going. How do we help enable this in a secure way that allows companies to grow, to focus on new areas, but to do it in a way that makes sense from a security perspective as well? So as far as other takeaways, other lessons learned, other thoughts, what wisdom can you bestow upon us?
So I think from my perspective, from our experience on this journey, I think there's two key takeaways. One is latency. There is going to be a difference in the latency that you get from your HSMs that are on premise. You've got the workload right next to the HSMs. You don't have that in the cloud. So that needs to be factored in. Each authorization has multiple trips to the HSM, so this latency soon adds up, and it's something that you need to consider. I think the other key one is related to the additional network complexity that I talked about. It's something that you definitely need to consider. Your network folks need to consider, your application folks need to understand, so that they can be prepared for troubleshooting, because it's different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get everybody in the same room, get everybody talking from the start, really.
Absolutely, and draw nice diagrams.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. So before we wrap up, I guess we just wanted to say thank you for your time today. Steve and I are both going to be around for the rest of the day today, so if anybody has any follow-up questions or any areas that they want to dig into in a little more detail, please let us know. We're absolutely happy to do it. Thank you all for your time today, and Steve, always good sharing the stage with you.
Yeah, and you. Thank you.